Welcome to sunny South Florida. My name is Haley and I'm a Florida native. I was born and raised in Fort Lauderdale, lived in Miami a little bit, but it wasn't until I went to Egypt and lived in Egypt for 4 years that I started my life diving. So my diving experience until this point has mostly been Red Sea diving, as well as recently I did some lake diving in Germany in a dry suit in cold water with very little visibility. So I had the opportunity to come back home, visit my parents, and finally take the dive into my home waters. And it's been very nice. But there have been some cultural differences that would be helpful to know before going in, or just like little things that I had to figure out while I was here that could help have a smooth experience going into it. I definitely think that diving in South Florida is worth it, but of course, like, reef diving in South Florida is not the only diving that Florida has to offer. From what I've heard, the cave system is really amazing. And if I was a little closer to more North Florida, I would definitely check that out. There's great dives all over the state, but in this video, I'm just going to be talking about my experience diving in South Florida. Yeah. So when is the best season to dive South Florida? Well, there's a basic answer, and then it also depends on what you're interested in seeing. So spring, summer are generally the best times to dive South Florida. In winter, the surface of the Atlantic Ocean can get a bit choppy, and this is where you're more likely to have boat trips canceled. The visibility can be affected by the choppiness of the sea. Yeah. So generally, spring, summer are the times to go. But summer, like right now, we're just beginning the rainy season and the hurricane season. So while you're more likely to have good diving days, especially when you go through like rainy season, June to October, hurricane season, June to October, you do want to take into consideration that if the possibility of being on land, dealing with rain isn't your thing, you might want to come a little earlier, like in spring or something like that. Yeah. So, but January, like I was saying, it isn't so good for diving, but it is like peak shark season. So if you're a shark person, January might be a good time to come. That is when you're more likely to see tiger sharks, for instance. Although there are places like in Jupiter, which I was not lucky enough to go to this trip, where I think you can always find operators that will take you out to do shark dives, and you do have a good chance of seeing some of these sharks, like some of the like bull sharks and tiger sharks all year round. But Jupiter is a good place for that. So right now we're actually in Goliath grouper season, which is pretty cool. And that is like another standout species to see in Florida. So yes, like I guess July to October is Goliath grouper season. And then, as I mentioned earlier, manatee season. The manatees are a little more difficult sort of, because by law you're not actually supposed to scuba dive with them. You're not supposed to interact with them at all if they even approach you. In the summer, they are mostly in the ocean, and in the winter, they do come into shore more closely, so into any little canals or channels to warm up in the winter. So the winter is generally the manatee season as well. If you want to have the opportunity, potentially to snorkel and see by chance a manatee, the winter is the best season for that. Water temperature. So I have been diving in a 5mm wetsuit, which a lot of people have kind of made fun of me about a little bit, but I regret nothing. Like, I am so happy to have had this, especially the wreck dives. South Florida has a lot of wreck dives, a lot of dives which are deep, well, deepish, you know, like 23 meters, like around that. And when I get down to that depth, I am cold. Like, I have been nothing but thankful, even now in summer, for my 5mm wetsuit. I do see lots of people wearing like 3mm wetsuits, or just like swim trunks, you know, to each his own. But the water temperature right now, from my diving, it's been around 27 degrees Celsius. In the winter months, it gets to between 13 to 20 degrees Celsius. So make your own call with that, diving in South Florida. It is very independent diving, so that is a good opportunity to sharpen your skills. Like, you know, it is a good opportunity to do what you should always be doing in diving and take responsibility for yourself and your buddy. You know, you should always be doing that, but in South Florida, really, it's all on you. So don't rely on the operator, the boat operator, or whatever to be keeping you safe. Don't rely on any of that here in South Florida. Like, they really, you know, they aren't taking on much responsibility. Of course, you have to, as always, sign all these like liability releases and everything. And I found they have a bit of a like laissez-faire, like live and let live, like you do you, kind of way of dealing with divers. So really, you know, you make sure that you like do your buddy check with your buddy. Like, you make sure that you guys both know all the signals. You make sure if there's anything you or your buddy need to know about before the dive, you discuss it. Make sure you have a plan or idea of your dive. I've also found that they won't a lot of the time take you to a site, even like prior with you maybe even knowing that site. You have to listen to the briefings. They won't even release the name of the site often in advance. They'll just take you out to a location. You buy a diving trip, you say, I want to go diving in Fort Lauderdale. I want to go diving in Boynton Beach. I want to go diving here. And they will take you on a boat to a reef you do not know the name of and drop you off. So it's very important you listen to the briefing. You know, listen to what the captain, and if there's a dive master or instructor on board, listen to what they say. Ask questions. Like, take responsibility for yourself. Don't let things like slide through your fingers. Make sure you're on the same page, like with your buddy, and you understand the dive that you're supposed to do, and, you know, stand your ground. As far as cost, almost every boat trip I've been on has been about around $100. So that's usually like a 2-dive boat trip. And like I said, the fee for a guide is not included. The fee for the guide is usually around $40 to $50. And it doesn't matter. I've found like the $100 per boat dive, 2-dive boat trip thing to be pretty consistent if you leave from Fort Lauderdale, if you leave from Key Largo. Yeah. Here, a lot of the time, if you want 2 tanks of nitrox, they will charge you $30 extra for that. You really want to make sure you bring your own gear. Like, don't come to South Florida to dive if you don't have your own gear. I mean, you can, but it will be very, very expensive. So if diving is your thing and you have your own gear, bring it. Bring it, because diving will be very expensive here. You know, it's not like diving in Egypt where gear rental is pretty cheap. You know, like every little thing adds up and costs money here. So anywhere you can save, do it. Basically, anywhere there's a beach, you can do shore diving. in South Florida. But of course the standout stars are Lauderdale by the Sea and Blue Heron Bridge. And this is super accessible. Anyone can basically dive it. All you do is find a dive shop online, drive to that dive shop that's near your location. Generally, all of the shore diving places that are popular have diving shops nearby. You can get a DIN tank at almost any of these dive shops near these shore dives. Yeah, and then have a buddy and just gear up from your car and basically walk right in. If you are snorkeling or scuba diving in Florida, you do need to have a buoy like this one with you at all times. So by law, you have to have one of these diver flags marking your location if you are scuba diving or snorkeling from shore. But boat traffic is one of the biggest dangers here to divers in South Florida. It's not the sharks, it's the boat traffic. So by law, you need to have one of these. They sell these for about like $30 or under, 20-something dollars at most of the dive shops. You can also rent them. I think rent it's about $10. For me, since I drove to the sites for shore diving, I also bought one of these, which is a key fob, like a little dry box key fob. And I essentially stored my car's keys in here. They have like giant orange reels here that seem to be really popular. I think they're really easy to use. But I honestly just used my, like a reel for SMBs and attached it. I have good control over that, so I just used that. To finish this video, I just want to say that diving South Florida is absolutely worth it. The spectacular dives like Spiegel Grove, if you like deep wrecks, if you like reefs, not so much coral, but there are like cool big creatures that you will see here that you might not see as often in other places. So like sharks, you will see a lot of. You will see turtles. You can see manatees. You will see barracuda. You will see tarpon if you do shore dives. Yeah, it's a good experience. It's an interesting experience. And I think it's worth it. Also, South Florida is cute, It's very cute. Everyone has their little like Hawaiian clothes on. But yeah, my only regret is just that I did not spend more time actually looking at the sea life when I was a kid, because you can tell it is spectacular now, it is beautiful now, but it must have been mind-blowing, like 30 years ago. So that's my only regret. I hope you enjoy your time in South Florida, and happy diving!